Nobody in that glittering ballroom knew that the woman scrubbing the floors had already changed the most powerful man in the room forever. She just didn't know he was there yet. The night Kang Tae-hyun arrived at the Mirai Hotel's group annual gala, Seoul held its breath. Camera flashes lit the marble entrance like lightning. Reporters pressed against the velvet ropes, shouting his name, reaching their microphones toward the man who had turned his grandfather's modest inn chain into a $15 billion empire before the age of 34. He walked the length of the red carpet without smiling, without waving, without doing anything that resembled warmth. Beside him, Han Seo-rin floated in a silver gown that cost more than most people earned in a year. She smiled for both of them. Inside the ballroom, past the champagne towers and the string quartet, and the senators and celebrities who had been placed carefully around round tables like expensive centerpieces, a woman in a gray uniform pushed a mop across the far end of the floor. Naomi Johnson moved quietly, the way she had learned to move in spaces that were not built for her. She kept her eyes down. She kept her pace steady. She had 2 more sections to finish before the VIP guests moved in, and her feet already ached from the double shift she had started at 5 that morning. She was wringing out the mop when she heard the crowd surge near the entrance. She looked up without thinking. It was reflex, the same reflex that makes a person flinch at a loud sound. And then she saw him. The mop handle slipped from her hands and clattered against the marble floor. 3 people turned to look at her. She didn't notice them. She could not breathe. She could not move. Because the man walking through those doors with his jaw set and his black suit pressed to military precision and his cold, unreadable eyes scanning the room, that man was supposed to be a memory. A wound she had spent 2 years convincing herself had finally healed. Kang Tae-hyun, alive and devastating, and 10 years removed from the boy who used to make her laugh in a tiny university apartment in Chicago while snow piled against the windows outside. The memories did not come slowly. They crashed into her all at once. Tae-hyun, sitting cross-legged on her dorm room floor, eating instant noodles and arguing passionately about architecture. Tae-hyun reaching across a library table to wipe ink off her cheek without asking. Tae-hyun whispering against her hair that he had never felt like himself until he met her. And then the other memories, the ones that came later. His mother's voice on the phone, cold and deliberate as a blade. The envelope of money left at her door. The threat wrapped in polished words. The choice she had made in a bathroom at 3 a.m. with her hands on her stomach and tears running down her wrists. She grabbed the mop handle from the floor and walked quickly in the opposite direction. She did not allow herself to look back. That night, in her basement apartment in the Mapo district, Naomi sat on the edge of her mattress long after she should have been asleep. The ceiling above her had a water stain shaped like a hand. Rain ticked softly against the small window near the top of the wall. Across the room, in the second-hand crib she had painted yellow herself, her son slept on his back with his arms stretched wide open, the way babies sleep when they have not yet learned that the world is not entirely safe. Naomi watched him breathe and tried to remember why she had chosen this, why she had not fought, why she had taken that envelope and run. Then Jaden made a small sound in his sleep and turned his head, and she saw his face in the pale light from the window, and she remembered immediately. She remembered everything. "Mama will never let them hurt you," she whispered. "No matter what." She did not sleep that night. The next morning arrived with the kind of cruelty that only bad timing can produce. Naomi's babysitter, Mrs. O from the 3rd floor, called at 7:15 to say her own daughter had gone into early labor and she needed to go to the hospital. Naomi stood in her kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear and calculated in real time every possible option she had, and watched each one collapse before she could hold it. She could not take an unpaid absence. She had already used both of her emergency days when Jaden had an ear infection the month before. She was 3 weeks behind on rent. She had $32 in her bank account and payday was Friday. She looked at Jaden. He was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, very seriously trying to put a toy car into a plastic cup. "Okay," she said, mostly to herself. "Okay." She packed his small bag with snacks and his favorite cartoon on her cracked tablet, bundled him into his coat, and carried him on her hip the entire 40-minute bus ride to the Mirai Tower. She told herself it would only be for a few hours. She told herself she would keep him hidden in the janitor's room on the 4th floor, where nobody important ever went. She told herself she had no other choice, which was the only part that was completely true. For a while, it worked. Jaden sat in the small room surrounded by his snacks, watching cartoons with the volume turned all the way down, while Naomi moved quickly through the executive floors with her cart. She checked on him every 20 minutes. She told him to stay. She told him she would be right back. Each time he nodded very seriously, the way 2-year-olds nod when they have not yet understood that instructions are not suggestions. It was on her 4th check that she was intercepted in the hallway by Han Seo-rin. Seo-rin had not planned to be on the cleaning floor. She had come to find Tae-hyun's assistant to complain about the placement of her name card at last night's gala, and she had taken a wrong turn, and finding herself in a hallway that smelled of cleaning solution and felt beneath her, she had already decided someone was going to feel her irritation about it. Naomi happened to be closest. "You," Seo-rin said, pointing at her the way someone might point at an object that had been placed incorrectly. "Did you clean the executive lounge this morning?" "Yes, ma'am," Naomi said. "There is a streak on the glass partition. I saw it when I walked past. It's unacceptable. I'll fix it right away. Are you rushing me?" Seo-rin's voice sharpened. "I'm speaking to you." "No, ma'am, I'm sorry." Seo-rin stepped closer, looking Naomi up and down the way a person inspects something they are considering returning. Then she reached out and flicked the collar of Naomi's uniform with 2 fingers. "You have a stain on your uniform. That's a reflection of this company. Of my fiancé's company." She paused to let that land. "What's your name?" "Naomi Johnson." "Well, Naomi Johnson, if I see another streak on that glass, or another stain on your uniform, or if I see your face in any area where I am present, I will personally speak to management about whether your position here is still appropriate." She smiled, and it was the most dangerous kind of smile. The kind that has been practiced. "Do we understand each other?" Naomi kept her face completely still. "Yes, ma'am." It took everything she had. She was still standing in that hallway, breathing slowly through her nose, when the call came through on her work radio. Security on the 38th floor was reporting a small child wandering the executive corridor. Naomi's blood turned to ice. The boardroom on the 38th floor held 22 of the most important business figures in South Korea. The merger being discussed at that table would restructure the telecommunications landscape of 3 countries. Kang Tae-hyun sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone, listening to a senior executive walk through a 60-slide financial projection with the grim patience of a man who had already identified every flaw in the presentation and was waiting for the speaker to catch up. The room was so quiet that when the large double doors at the end slowly, silently swung open, everyone heard them. Nobody moved at first. They all assumed it was an assistant with a message. They waited for the click of professional shoes on the hardwood floor. Instead, what they heard was the soft, uneven pat, pat, pat of small hands and knees moving across the surface. Jaden crawled into the boardroom holding a red toy car in one fist and looking around with the calm, observational interest of a scientist entering a new habitat. He paused just inside the doors, sat up on his knees, and surveyed the long table full of frozen adults with genuine curiosity. Somewhere at the far end of the table, a junior executive made a sound that was almost a laugh and immediately suppressed it. Jaden's eyes moved down the table slowly, passing face to face, until they landed on the man at the head. He stared. He tilted his head slightly. Then, in a voice that was soft and very clear and cut through the silence like a knife through water, he said, "Papa." The room did not just go quiet. It went still in a way that rooms rarely go still, the kind of stillness that happens when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, something that rearranges the air. 22 highly paid professionals sat motionless, looking at the baby, then at the CEO, then back at the baby. Tae-hyun had not moved a single muscle. He was staring at the child with an expression that his board members had never seen on his face in the combined years they had known him. Not confusion, not irritation, something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition, because the child had his eyes, not a resemblance, not a similarity. His eyes, the exact shape, the exact darkness, the exact quiet intensity. The doors burst open behind Jaden, and Naomi came through them at a speed that was just below running, her face a landscape of pure terror. She crossed the room in seconds, dropped to her knees, and scooped Jaden up against her chest. "I'm so sorry," she said. To the table, to the room, to the ceiling. "I'm so sorry. He got out. He wasn't supposed to. I'm so sorry." And then Tae-hyun's voice came from the head of the table. "Naomi." It was not a question. It was not even surprise. It was the sound of a man hearing a song he had not heard in years and recognizing every note immediately, against his will, in spite of himself. Naomi went rigid. Slowly, the way a person turns to face something they know will change everything. She turned around. Tae-hyun had risen from his chair. He was staring at her across the length of the boardroom, with an expression that had cracked open something underneath the stone. His voice, when it came again, was quieter. "Naomi Johnson." She held Jaden tighter. Her chin came up. "I'm leaving," she said. "Right now. I'm so sorry for the interruption." And she walked out of that boardroom with her son pressed against her heart and every eye in the room watching her go. She did not let herself cry until she was in the elevator with the doors closed. Tae-hyun did not hear a single word of the rest of that meeting. By the time the executives filed out and his assistant was quietly asking if he wanted his afternoon schedule cleared, Tae-hyun was already standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over Seoul, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight, doing arithmetic in his head that he didn't want to do, but could not stop doing. "Suhan," he said, without turning around. "Yes, sir." "The maid who was in the boardroom, Naomi Johnson. I want everything. Where she lives, how long she's worked here, who she is. Sir, today." By evening, Tae-hyun was sitting at his desk, reading a file on his tablet that his assistant had compiled with terrifying efficiency. Naomi Johnson, 27 years old, American national, here on a work visa. Hired by the building's cleaning services contractor 14 months ago. Previously employed at 2 other hotels and a hospital. No family in Korea. 1 dependent. A child, approximately 2 years old. 2 years old. Tae-hyun put the tablet down on his desk and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. 3 years ago, he had come back from a conference in Chicago to find Naomi's apartment empty. Her number disconnected. A note that his mother had handed him personally in handwriting that was not Naomi's, saying only that she had gone back to America and did not want to be contacted. Madame Kang had stood beside him while he read it and said, "She was never serious, Tae-hyun. She found someone else. A woman like that was never going to stay." And he had believed it. He had been devastated and furious, and he had believed it, because what other explanation had he been given? 2 years old. He picked the tablet back up. Meanwhile, across the city, Seo-rin was in her dressing room, receiving a very different kind of briefing. She had seen Tae-hyun's face in that boardroom before he could arrange it back into blankness. She had seen the way he said that woman's name. She had spent the last 3 hours making calls, and now she sat very still in her chair while her assistant laid out what she had found, and her expression did not change once, because she was very good at not letting her face say things before she was ready. "How old is the child?" she asked. "Approximately 2, ma'am." Seo-rin picked up her phone. "I need to speak with Dr. Lim," she said. "I have a job for him." She was going to end this quietly. She was going to prove the child had nothing to do with Tae-hyun, and then Naomi Johnson would be dismissed from employment, and that would be the end of it. A DNA test arranged quietly through intermediaries would take 4 days. She would have her answer before anyone had to make a scene. She was completely certain of what the answer would say. She arranged it that night. She did not tell Tae-hyun. She did not tell Madame Kang. She handled it the way she handled all inconveniences, efficiently and alone. 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, Tae-hyun was in the middle of a call with a partner firm in Tokyo when Seo-rin walked into his office without knocking. He knew immediately that something had happened. Seo-rin never walked into a room looking like that. Like the room was falling, and she was trying not to fall with it. He ended the call. "Tell me," he said. She set a document on his desk. He looked at it. He read the number. 99.99%. The office was completely silent for a very long time. "You had a DNA test run on my son," he said, "without telling me. I needed to know. He is my son." Tae-hyun stood up slowly. His voice was very quiet, which was always more frightening than when it was loud. "You had my son's DNA collected without his mother's knowledge or mine. I was protecting us." Seo-rin's composure fractured. "I was protecting what we've built, Tae-hyun, because that woman shows up out of nowhere with a child, and suddenly you're distracted and off balance, and everyone in that boardroom saw it. I needed to know the truth." "The truth," he repeated. He looked at the document again. "You got it." The silence that followed was not a comfortable one. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He didn't answer. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Suhan, find out which shift Naomi Johnson is working tonight and where she'll be." Seo-rin stared at him. "Tae-hyun, I think," he said, carefully and finally. "You should go." That same evening, just after 9 o'clock, a security footage clip began making the rounds on social media. Nobody was certain who had released it, though the investigation that followed would eventually point to a junior staff member from the building's monitoring room who had been approached by someone the investigation could never quite identify. The clip was 47 seconds long. It showed the interior of the Mirai Tower boardroom from above. It showed a small child crawling across the floor toward a long conference table. It showed the child looking up at the man at the head of the table, and it captured, just barely, in the quietest audio, the child's voice saying a single word. By midnight, it had 600,000 views. By 3 in the morning, it had 3 million. The comments were an avalanche. "Secret billionaire baby? Wait, who is this woman? She works as a maid?" The way he just froze when the baby said that. She's been cleaning his building for over a year, and he didn't know? This is insane. I need the full story right now. By morning, there were reporters outside Naomi's building. She didn't know yet. She was asleep when it started. She woke up at 5:30 as usual, got dressed, started making Jaden's breakfast, and opened her door to take the trash to the end of the hall. The woman from upstairs was standing in the corridor with her phone, showing it to her husband in hushed, excited tones. They went quiet when they saw Naomi. Naomi took the trash out. She came back inside. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened her own phone. She found the clip in 3 seconds. She watched it 4 times. Then she put the phone face down on the table and sat very still, while Jaden came toddling out of the bedroom dragging his toy car, looked up at her face, and said, "Mama?" She pulled him into her lap and held him tightly against her chest, and he patted her arm with his small hand, which was something he did when he sensed she needed it, because even at 2 years old, Jaden had learned to read her. She did not make it to work that day. There were 3 reporters on the pavement outside her building by 9 o'clock. and by 11, there were 7. One of them found her name from the building's tenant board and began calling her phone. She turned it off after the first call. She sat on the floor with her back against the door, and Jaden playing with blocks in front of her, and she said to herself, quietly and without drama, "I ruined his life. I brought this on him." And she meant Jaden. She was not thinking about herself at all. She had been sitting there for 2 hours when someone knocked on the door. She assumed it was a reporter. She said, through the door, "Please leave. I have nothing to say." "Naomi." Tae-hyun's voice came through the wood like something she had built walls against for 3 years, and those walls went down in an instant. "I'm alone. Please open the door." She didn't move for a long moment. Then she got up and opened it. He looked different without the boardroom behind him. He looked, for the first time since she had seen him at the gala, like a person rather than a position. His tie was loosened. There were shadows under his eyes that suggested he had not slept. He was holding nothing. He stood in the hallway of her basement apartment building, looking at her, with an expression that she could not fully categorize, and he said, "I need to know everything." She let him in. They sat at her kitchen table while Jaden played on the floor between them, and Naomi told him. She told him about the phone call from his mother. She told him about the envelope of money pushed under her door and the words that had come with it, precise and devastating. She told him what she had been told would happen to her visa status, to her family in America, if she stayed and fought. She told him she had believed it because she had been 24 years old and alone and terrified, and the woman speaking to her had had the full weight of the Kong family fortune behind every word. She told him she had packed her apartment in 6 hours. She told him she'd written a note she hadn't known how to end and eventually given up trying, and she supposed someone else had written the one he received. Tae-hyun listened to all of it without speaking. He sat very still, with his hands flat on the table, and his jaw tight, and his eyes fixed on her face. And she could see, watching him, the exact moment each piece of information hit him. She watched it move through him like something seismic. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of Jaden making engine noises with his toy car. "She told me you'd left for another man," Tae-hyun said finally. "I know. I spent 2 years furious at you." His voice was controlled, and it cost him something to keep it that way. "I thought you—" He stopped. "I would have come for you, Naomi, if I had known. You understand that. I would have—" "I know," she said again, softer. "I know." Jaden chose that moment to hold his toy car up toward Tae-hyun and say, with great seriousness, "Car." Tae-hyun looked at his son. Something in his face went completely unguarded for one unprotected second, and Naomi looked away because it felt too private to watch. He reached out and took the toy car. "Car," he agreed. Jaden climbed into his lap. Tae-hyun went very still, the way a person goes still when they're afraid that moving will end something. His arms came around his son carefully, like something he was learning in real time, and Naomi watched him hold his child for the first time, and pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. Then Jaden's small body went limp and heavy with the suddenness that only very young children can manage, and Naomi realized he had simply fallen asleep, right there in his father's arms, completely unbothered, the way he did when he felt entirely safe. Tae-hyun looked up at her. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the kitchen light. "I'm going to fix this," he said. She shook her head. "You don't have to. He's my son." His voice did not waver. "And what was done to you was done because of my name. I'm going to fix it." He left 2 hours later, only after they had settled Jaden into his crib, and he stood in the doorway of the tiny bedroom, looking at his sleeping son for a long moment, before he turned and walked out without a word. Naomi leaned her back against the closed front door after he left, and listened to herself breathe. That night, Madame Kang was in the sitting room of the family home in Gangnam when she heard the elevator from the private garage open. She assumed it was the housekeeper. She did not look up from her tea. "Did you threaten her?" She looked up. Tae-hyun was standing in the middle of the room. She had known her son for 34 years, and she had never seen him look at her the way he was looking at her now. She set her cup down. "Tae-hyun, whatever she's told you, did you threaten her?" He said it again, slower. "I protected this family." Her voice was firm. It had always been firm. "That woman wasn't suitable. She is the mother of your grandson." His voice cracked on the word grandson, just slightly, and then it was smooth again. "She raised my son alone, in a basement apartment, while I was building a hotel empire 5 minutes across this city. She was in the same building as me for 14 months, and she was hiding because she was afraid of what you would do, because of what you already did." He took a step toward her. "She had nothing. She had nothing, and she kept him safe, and she worked 3 jobs, and she never asked me for a single thing. And you want to tell me about protecting this family?" Madame Kang opened her mouth. "Don't." He said it quietly. "I have listened to every decision you've made for this company, for this family, for my life, and I have let you make most of them because I believed you wanted what was good for me. But there is a little boy asleep in a basement apartment right now who has never had a bedroom of his own, who has never known his father, who called me Papa in a room full of strangers, and meant it because nobody had ever told him not to. And that is the result of what you chose to protect." Madame Kang was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had lost some of its certainty. "You don't know what she would have cost this family." "I know exactly what she cost us," he said. "All 3 of us. And it's not a number you can calculate." He turned toward the elevator. "I'm ending my engagement to Seo-rin tomorrow, and I'm acknowledging my son publicly. I wanted to tell you before it happened. Tae-hyun, good night, Mother." The elevator closed. She sat alone in the sitting room for a very long time after that. The press conference the following afternoon was supposed to be a routine business announcement. Tae-hyun had asked Seo-rin to be present, and she had come, because even now she could not entirely believe he would do it. Not in public. Not with the cameras rolling and the reporters jostling for position and the quarterly earnings report sitting on every journalist's desk. He did it. He stood at the podium, and he said, clearly and without apology, that his engagement to Han Seo-rin was over. He said it had been his decision, reached after careful reflection, and that he wished her well with complete sincerity. He thanked the press for their attention, and then he stepped away from the podium. The murmur in the room was building toward a roar when he did the thing nobody had expected. He walked to the back of the room where Naomi was standing against the wall with Jaden on her hip. She had not known he would call her. She had only come because his assistant had asked her to be there, and she had told herself she was only coming to understand what was happening, not to be part of it. The cameras found her immediately. They always do. Tae-hyun stopped in front of her. The room fell so quiet that Jaden's small breathing was almost audible. Tae-hyun looked at Naomi for a moment, and then he did something that made the entire press corps go collectively breathless. He went down on one knee, not in a grand sweep, slowly, deliberately, with full awareness of what it meant. "I can't undo it," he said. His voice was not quite steady, and he did not try to make it so. "I can't undo what was taken from you. I can't give back the nights you were alone, or the mornings you counted coins, or the years I should have been there and wasn't." He stopped. He pressed his lips together. "But I am asking you, not as a CEO, not as a Kang, as the man who has loved you since we were 22 years old in a Chicago winter, and I didn't know how to say it properly then either." He reached up and took her hand very carefully. "Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to carry anything alone again. Let me come home to both of you. Let me be his father every single day, and not just in a boardroom where he startled the quarterly earnings out of 22 executives." His voice broke, just slightly, on the next word. "Please." Naomi was crying. She had been trying not to, but she had lost that battle about 30 seconds in. Her free hand was pressed flat against her sternum like she was trying to hold something in. Jaden looked between them both. Then he leaned forward, away from his mother, toward his father, with the absolute certainty of a child who has already decided, arms outstretched. "Papa," he said, and the room dissolved. Reporters were wiping their eyes. An anchor from a national broadcast network later admitted on air that she had cried openly and was not embarrassed about it. A photographer in the front row caught the image that would become the most shared photograph in South Korea that year. Naomi's face, tear-streaked and radiant. Jaden's arms around his father's neck, and Tae-hyun on one knee with his eyes closed, and his son held against his chest like something he would never put down again. Naomi said yes. She said it quietly, so that only he could hear it, and that felt right. Some things didn't need to be performed. In the months that followed, Tae-hyun announced the establishment of the Jaden Foundation, a non-profit organization providing legal aid, housing assistance, and employment support to immigrant single mothers across Korea. The announcement was made quietly, without a press conference, and it was funded entirely from his personal holdings, not the company budget. When journalists asked him about it, he said only that it was a debt he owed, not a gesture he deserved credit for. Naomi stopped cleaning office towers. She enrolled in the architecture program she had abandoned when she left Chicago at a university in Seoul, because Tae-hyun had found her old portfolio in a box she had not unpacked since she arrived in Korea and had sat with it for an hour without speaking. She told him later that she had given up on architecture because it felt impossible, and he had told her very firmly that she was confusing impossible with expensive, and that the second problem was the only one of the two that he could actually solve, so she should let him. She had laughed at that. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the first one he had heard in too long. He had decided, quietly and privately, that hearing that laugh as often as possible was the most important project he had ever undertaken. Jaden got a bedroom, a real one, painted yellow, because his mother had painted his crib yellow, and that was the color that meant safe to him. He did not fully understand yet what had changed in his world, only that there was now a tall, quiet man who showed up every morning and read to him before he went to sleep, and took him to the park on Saturdays, and always held his hand when they walked anywhere, like letting go was not something he had any interest in practicing. On a Tuesday morning in December, the first snow of the year came down over Seoul in slow, soft curtains. Tae-hyun came out of the Mirai Tower ahead of a 9 o'clock meeting, which he had never done in his professional life, because Naomi and Jaden were standing on the pavement outside. Jaden, in his red coat with his mittened hands, held up trying to catch snowflakes. The three of them stood there together, Jaden between his parents, holding both their hands, turning his face up to the sky, with his eyes wide and his mouth open, delighted by something as simple as snow. In that spot, on that pavement, 14 months earlier, a small boy had crawled out of a janitor's room and wandered upstairs and changed everything. Tae-hyun looked across the top of his son's head at Naomi. She was already looking at him. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Some debts are paid not in words, but in ordinary mornings, in school lunches packed, in yellow bedrooms, and held hands, and enough snow to catch in both palms if you stand very still and stay. They stayed. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do something generous right now. Hit the like button and let the algorithm know this kind of storytelling matters. Subscribe so you never miss what we put out next, because we promise you, what's coming is worth staying for. And drop a comment below. Tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Was it when Jaden said "Papa" in that boardroom? Was it when Tae-hyun went to his knees at the press conference? Was it the yellow bedroom? Tell us. We read every single one.